This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
Well. If it's Thursday, it's not throwback. It's Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with Gary Patrick Smith in studio, me from New York. And with any luck, I'll be in studio for Reasonable Doubt, which drops on Saturday. So, Gary, how are you?
Wow, that's news to me. You're coming back out west. That's great to hear. We're excited to have you.
Let's see if I can be in studio tomorrow. I miss Adam and you, and I want to see you guys in the flesh.
That's excellent. And, I'll do a little tease here. We have a very exciting guest coming up in a few weeks that I believe you're going to try to be in studio for as well. And that guest will be in studio. So we'll have a very exciting guest, Mark and Adam, all in studio. I'm very excited.
Speaking of very exciting guests, didn't we have John Lewin, Deputy DA, on Reasonable Doubt at one point?
We did. It was actually pretty recently. He called in to talk about a case where a gentleman who had threatened to kill him was up for parole, and he was trying to get a little press on the matter. But since then, John Lewin has moved on to another notable case. He is working on the prosecution of Fred Durst.
Robert Durst.
Robert Durst. That was a Freudian slip from my age group. Wow.
I was going to say, who's Fred Durst? But it reminds me of the false report of Groban dying this week, but it was Grogan. So
right. Fred Durst, of course, from Limp Bizkit. That's right, my Freudian slip. So Robert Durst.
I was on the retainer for Fred Durst at one point for one tour, as I remember, a billion years ago. Anyway, it's interesting because Durst's trial, I thought, started and then stopped with COVID. It was kind of like my Utah trial where we were in the middle of it, start. Now it's starting again. And as you mentioned, and I didn't pick up on this, Gary is the sharp one. John Lewin, who was our guest couple of months back, I guess, is the lead prosecutor on that case. That's being tried, I think, in LAX court. Gary, have you been watching, or your media? Do you have the media credentials so that you can get some of the live stream?
I do. I've watched a little bit of it. There's been a few interruptions in the feed where I've clicked on it when I had a free half hour or so, and the stream had been taken down. So it's been a little hit or miss, but I've been watching a little bit of it. And it's interesting. You did point out that it sort of started and stopped with COVID. And as a result, the judge allowed both the prosecution and the defense to sort of give a second opening statement because there's been such a delay. I don't think that's something that would happen often.
No, it isn't. It's interesting. Dick DeGuerin, who's trying this case, famously won Durst's last murder trial. And his last murder trial was in Texas. I forget the year. But there was also a situation where basically he admitted to the hacking up or the chopping up of the victim in that case, but said he wasn't the one who'd done it. And so there was, to some degree, he had disposed of the body, but he was not the one who was responsible for the killing in that case. And he was acquitted. And so Dick is trying to catch lightning in a bottle a second time now in L.A.
Yeah, that was a 2001 case, the killing and dismemberment of Morris Black out of Galveston. He was the body was found floating in Galveston Bay. Robert Durst is just exceedingly interesting, and it's for anyone who watched The Jinx back in 2015. He was arrested the day the final episode was slated to come out that evening. So he's been in custody in one form or another ever since 2015, and COVID and XYZ extradition, and now we're finally here. So that's something, as Mark alluded to, we have the media access to the stream. So as the process unfolds and there's interesting things to highlight, we'll be trying to bring you guys some coverage of that case and maybe even some courtroom video as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting, as more of this happens, we'll summarize it, and I think it'll become a recurring subject here on Beyond because for whatever reason, it hasn't caught on nationally, but I think the story is fascinating for a number of reasons, and we'll catch up with that. One story that has kind of caught fire, at least among certain people, is this Tibbetts story out of Iowa. You want run that down, Gary, and then I'll kind of give you my thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting case. The victim is Mollie Tibbetts. She was, I believe, 20 years old at the time of the murder. She was an avid runner, and she was house sitting for her boyfriend and his brother, taking care of the dogs while they were out of town working. And apparently she was out for one of her very common runs around her neighborhood, one of the routes she takes frequently, and then she disappeared. And they found this gentleman, a farmhand out of Iowa, whose name, my computer is failing on me, so his name is escaping me, but they found this gentleman who's now on trial, and he was seen on security footage kind of driving past her, then circling back around and sort of, coming back. He apparently admitted that he found her attractive when he was interviewed by police, and eventually led the police to her body, where she was in a cornfield covered with corn stalks. But there is some question. The alleged murderer here is a Mexican national, and there have been some questions around his Miranda rights and when he was advised that he was allowed to have an attorney, when he was advised that he didn't have to cooperate. So some of what he told the police is going to be excluded, but not all, and the prosecution is very confident that what they do have in is enough to send this guy away.
This is a very difficult case if you're a defense lawyer because, first of all, the circumstances around it resonate with people, and rightfully so, I suppose. It reminds me back in the day when I represented then Congressman Gary Condit, and he was investigating the Chandra Levy, and I had always thought that the same thing, which ultimately became kind of the prosecutorial theory 2 years later, many years later, was that an immigrant, and I think in that case, Central American immigrant, who had been convicted of 2 assaults in that park where Chandra would jog in the morning, was later identified, convicted, then his conviction thrown out in that case. Interestingly, this week also, the prosecutors in that case are up in front of the District of Columbia Disciplinary Board for ethical violations in regards to Giglio and Brady violations, which reminded me of this Tibbetts case, because in Tibbetts it reminds me of that case that was tried in San Francisco where the immigration status of the accused became a political football during the Trump administration. That gentleman was in San Francisco, was acquitted. But this case is more difficult because, as opposed to an accidental shooting, which was the defense in the San Francisco case, this case, you've got somebody who at least has made some damaging admissions, if not a confession, and if you believe what's reported, actually led investigators to where the young lady's body was recovered. So it's a difficult case. Also, another kind of undercurrent of this is that Miss Tibbetts, who was killed, father wrote an op-ed piece in Iowa, which got a lot of national attention, in which he basically made a very compelling and argument that his daughter's death should not become a political football or a pivot or a reason to go after immigrants. In fact, he famously said at the conclusion of this very moving piece, with I think a wink and a nod, at least in writing, that the immigrants and the Mexicans in Iowa are no different than native-born Iowans, except they had better food. And I thought that was, as a father of a daughter, I thought that if you've got some semblance of gallows humor after the most horrific thing that could happen to you, that shows that he's at least getting up in the morning and moving on. Yeah, which is good. That's very nice to hear. Just to clean it up, our associate producer Emmy helped me out. The alleged killer is named Christian Bena Rivera. He's a 24-year-old Iowa dairy farm worker. All right, so we will keep an eye on that case and keep you guys updated as to developments as well. Mark, there's one more that I want to point out that our friend Brett, who's been helping us out with topics for this show,
eagle-eyed and picked up, and you and I were both instantly enamored.
We instantly gave a hat tip to Brett.
Absolutely.
We love this case.
That's exactly why I'm giving him the shout out by name, because he deserves it. This is one that we both missed, and it's just great. I'm going to read you the headline of the article that I'm working off of. U.S. judge legally recognizes friends with benefits.
Right?
All right.
How good is that?
It's amazing. So this judge out of New Jersey basically has ruled that a gentleman who had a warrant for heroin distribution and possible weapons charges, the cops had a warrant to arrest him. They got a tip that he was over at a lady's house who he had maybe slept with once or twice before, but, was clearly not in a long-term relationship with. They had a warrant that he was there. They knocked on the door. She opened it, and they entered the house and started searching for his, belongings. They found a fanny pack that had, I think, over 100 vials of heroin and a handgun. And she has now basically said that because this was a lady that he was seeing sexually, that they didn't have any right to do that.
Yeah, the technical legal term standing, and she conferred standing on him based on. And by the way, I think it was the government in their opposition to the motion to suppress who made the argument that this woman and her household was no more than somebody who was friends with benefits. And she took that, the judge did, and she ran with it. I think it's probably a correct decision. I don't know that it'll actually hold up on appeal, given kind of where America is today, but we'll see. I think it's reminiscent for me, at least. There was a judge out in Lancaster in Southern California who years ago, and I've mentioned this a couple of times on the show, who had ruled that the marital privilege didn't apply because it was a bad marriage, which I always thought was humorous. And then she got reversed by the Court of Appeal. But in this case, I think if you're over at somebody's house and you're sleeping there, and if you've had sex with them before, which is, by the way, in California at least, I haven't looked at the New Jersey statute, but in California, you've got an absolute right to privacy that includes, in the California Constitution, includes your sexual privacy. If you've got that right, and they've read it into the U.S. Constitution now, based on all of the abortion rulings. If you have that right, then why wouldn't you have the right, if you've got that constitutional right to privacy, to have standing in a place where you're bing bang bonging with your friend with benefits? So makes sense to me, at least from a legal and logical standpoint. We'll see if it stands. We'll give you updates as they occur. Now, the last topic, which we're going to tease for Saturday's show, is and the reason we're going to tease it is because I think it requires more than just a cursory mention here.
It's just too big, and we need Ace as well.
Yeah, we need Ace on this, and it's too much of a topic to tackle in the best 14 minutes in the universe. So is the Attorney General here in New York, where I'm sitting right now, admitting in a statement by a spokesperson that was in response to a lawyer for a witness who was cooperating, namely Weisselberg, the CFO of the Trump Organization's estranged daughter-in-law, that the lawyer for the estranged daughter-in-law, who famously, I think there's a picture, you can drop it in the post-production, of her wheeling over a bell cart with boxes and other things. They've admitted now that the AG's office has joined forces with the Manhattan DA and expanded the previously reported civil investigation into a joint criminal investigation with the Manhattan DA. That obviously does not portend well for Trump, because the state action is, I've always believed, we've said here countless times, that's his greatest threat.
I absolutely agree, and I don't like doing post-production work, so I'll just throw it up right there.
Look at that. Look, now, see, Gary, you are a master. So this is, and by the way, for those of you who aren't in the weeds, I will tell you, almost every case that involves somebody who's getting investigated, all roads seem to always lead through a disgruntled spouse or ex-employee. And here we go. We've got the the disgruntled ex-daughter-in-law who's apparently cooperating and leading investigators through a supposed series of items that will implicate the Trump organization, supposedly for tax fraud, insurance fraud, and a series of other wire fraud and bank fraud is apparently the gravamen of the investigation itself.
Well, that's what you guys can look forward to on Saturday's Best Hour in the Universe, the full edition of Reasonable Doubt. Mark, I have to bid you adieu. Adam is here and needs the studio, so we will be back with you guys first thing Saturday morning.
You've got a much bigger name on the other door, so say hi to my BFF.
Bye, Mark.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. Stay tuned for more bonus episodes coming soon.